This is Ian Williams, President of the Foreign Press Association of New York and the USA. And it gives us a great deal of pleasure today to host Bianca Jagger of the Bianca Jagger Human Rights Foundation to talk about native Nicaragua. And in case anyone thinks that Bianca is just concerned about that, Bianca and I have worked together for, good heavens, I don't want to count the years, but over 20 years on human rights at the United Nations, from the Balkans to Kosovo, Bosnia, many other places. So she's far from being obsessive about her native land, but there's plenty to be obsessive about at the moment. And Bianca, you know, many people in the left thought of Daniel Ortega as the great leftist hero fighting against right-wing oppression from the Somozas and then fighting against Ronald Reagan and imperialism. What went wrong?
Well, I think that many Nicaraguans wonder the same. I think what went wrong is that Daniel Ortega betrayed the revolution and has become a more brutal, more bloodthirsty dictator than the Somoza family was. Daniel Ortega, I was thinking about how I was going to address today the press. And when I think about what are the most important issues that I should bring forward. And of course, when we first spoke, I had just read and witnessed the Tribunal of Conscience, where they found that Daniel Ortega, beside the fact that he's been committing crimes against humanity in Nicaragua, that he was using sexual violence as torture. And the Arias Foundation did an extraordinary work with some very remarkable legal minds, women, that concluded that Daniel Ortega and his regime had really engaged has used sexual violence as torture, and they were able to document and to interview 18 different people, 11 women and seven men. And the accounts and the report is quite shocking and really makes you wonder what kind of a regime is Daniel Ortega. But I think that if we go back to when Daniel Ortega was the leader that many regarded as the leader of the Sandinista revolution, and this leftist leader, I think that they will probably be very surprised to find out that there is nothing left of that leader. And in fact, Daniel Ortega has been able to solidify his power, but making deals with the most corrupt right-wing segments of the Nicaraguan society. That in particular, I'm speaking of Arnoldo Alemán, the previous president, that is being regarded by many as one of the most corrupt leaders in Latin America. And he made a deal with him in order for him to be able to come back to power. And he was in jail, and so that allowed Arnoldo to come back. And they have worked together to be able to have all the votes that he needs to change the constitution and to dismantle legal institutions in Nicaragua. And that is what I am now very concerned. And that is what I'm making an appeal to journalists who I hope are present here, because Daniel Ortega and his regime just introduced 3 very, very disturbing legislation. One of them is proposed to classify Nicaraguan as foreign agents. Anyone, which is a law that was introduced by Putin before and has been used in many of the Eastern European countries that don't have a real democracy. And probably you could compare Nicaragua to North Korea and to other countries, and because it will be it will be they will be accused if they receive any funding, anyone in Nicaragua, any journalist, any NGO, any political opponent who receives any funding from the outside will be regarded as a foreign agent and working for the enemy, and they will have to register and they will have to declare any fundings they receive, and that will not allow them to be able to participate in any kind of election in Nicaragua. In fact, what Daniel Ortega has been doing since 2018, when there was a peaceful uprising in Nicaragua, is to clamping down on the media, on the church, on the NGOs, on women, on assassinating poor farmers. You must remember during the Contra War, and I was one that opposed the Contra War, but I think that we need to reconsider many of what we thought we understood, because there were a lot of poor farmers in Nicaragua who were taken advantage by Daniel Ortega as well as by the Contra, and many of those poor farmers who had opposed the Interoceanic Canal and who have opposed Daniel Ortega and his policies have been slowly being murdered in remote places in Nicaragua where it is very difficult to document. So there is as well another legislation that he has introduced in the General Assembly, which is a cyber crime, so that he will be able to as well to curtail the right of people to be able to be on social media and the media. And then I don't know how much some of you know, but I hope that you're aware about the persecution, the relentless persecution against the media, against Confidencial, which is run by Carlos Fernando Chamorro, a very prominent and well-respected journalist around the world, who is the son of Violeta Chamorro, and the great journalist Pedro Joaquin Chamorro, who was assassinated by Somoza, but as well 100% Noticia, 100% news. And now at the moment as we speak, he's trying to put an embargo on Canal 12 so that he can really go after every free press, every journalist. Journalists in Nicaragua have been assassinated, they have been put in jail, and they are under threat all the time, just like the church, the Catholic Church is. Women groups are, students in Nicaragua. After we have the peaceful insurrection in 2018, there were more than 300 people that were assassinated, more than 2,000 that were wounded, and there were 100 political prisoners. And today we still have about 100 political prisoners, and everyone is under threat of being put in jail. And of course, there are no legal institutions. The justice system is completely at the mercy of Daniel Ortega. And I am here to say, I accuse Daniel Ortega for being a murderous dictator, for committing crimes against humanity, for persecuting the media, for making sure that we will not have legal and fair election in Nicaragua in 2021. And that, not to forget, that we already have about 100,000 people who had left the country and who are today on exile in countries such as Costa Rica, and some in the United States and in other countries in Latin America, and even here in Europe. And this new law was condemned by the EU, it's been condemned by NGOs, it's been condemned by the US government, but we need to have more sanctions, more Magnitsky sanctions that must be applied to specific corrupt individuals who are part of the regime of Daniel Ortega. We must, I'm here, Ian. One of the reasons why I was so happy that you invite me to be in this press conference is because I'm here to appeal to the media. Please, it is not North Korea, it is Nicaragua, it is not Russia, it is not Cuba, but Daniel Ortega wants Nicaragua to be another Cuba and to make sure that he is president for life. And since the Nicaraguans already know that revolutions are not successful, like we had in Nicaragua, the Sandinista revolution, because what did we have? We got rid of the Somoza regime, but we have today a dictator with his wife, Rosario Murillo, who are worse than the Somoza were at the time in Nicaragua, which is not to say little.
I take it you haven't been back to Nicaragua in recent years.
I have been, I was there in 2018. I went to Nicaragua. I have been a few times to release reports with Amnesty International. And the last one I released in Nicaragua was called Shoot to Kill, which was a documentation of how Daniel Ortega was using a sniper shooter to kill the demonstrators. And it was how he used, how he targeted to hit them on the head or to hit them on the throat, on the chest, and it was really shoot to kill. And I participated in a demonstration, in a big rally to support the mothers of those who had fell during the months of April, which was when the peaceful insurrection began. And so thousands of people came out, you know, families with children and older people. And I was part of that rally, that demonstration. And suddenly we began to hear shots, and then we began to see that Daniel Ortega was using exactly what that report say, shoot to kill. And there were between 16 or 18 people who were killed, and there were dozens of people who were wounded while I was there. And I was held by a young student that took me and brought me out of that demonstration and took me home. But one of the things that was one of the most heinous things that Daniel Ortega has done is that the Ministry of Health gave an order not to give medical attention to any of the wounded students. So they will arrive at the doorsteps of the hospital and they couldn't receive any medical attention and died. And just to bring it to today, Nicaragua, of course, has COVID-19, and doctors at Daniel Ortega pretends that we don't have COVID-19 and is not providing the personal protection, PPE, personal protection equipment to the doctors. And doctors, if they highlight the threat of COVID-19 to the public, they are being thrown out. In fact, all of those doctors who were against the orders of the Minister of Health at the time and provided medical attention to the students were lost their jobs. And so we have hundreds of doctors who are out of work and hundreds of doctors who left Nicaragua who are now in other countries, including in Costa Rica.
We have a question come in from Erika Jakobasa from TAZ Germany. What role does the Catholic Church play in this situation? And she'd also like to hear from you about the role of the Church and your family's historic take on the Somoza regime in the Contras. But the Church one is very interesting because for many leftists around the world, one of the first visible signs that Ortega had turned was when he supported one of the most draconian anti-abortion laws in the world. Was that at the behest of the Church or a particular group within the Church, or?
Let's try to clarify. The Church and the cardinal who came out with Daniel Ortega and helped him. I don't think he won the elections, really. I think the elections, those elections were fraudulent. Help him out and campaigned with him. That was Cardinal Obando y Bravo, a very, very well-known religious leader in Nicaragua who was really the leader of the Contra. And so it was quite extraordinary to see him come out. And as a payback, Daniel Ortega introduced an anti-abortion law in Nicaragua who never had an anti-abortion law since time immemorial. But let me come to the church today, because Daniel Ortega is persecuting the cardinals and the bishops and the priests in Nicaragua. And not only that, but as well the destruction of churches. I mean, the church, the Catholic Church, has played an extraordinary role in Nicaragua. And you have some highly respected bishops like Bishop Silvio Valles, who had to leave the country because he was probably the most respected figure in the country, and Daniel Ortega pushed for him to have to leave the country. But the persecution continues unabated against the Catholic Church. So I will say that the Catholic Church has played a remarkable role in supporting the people of Nicaragua, in supporting the students, in supporting the poor farmers, and being a voice of reason, and with great courage denouncing what Daniel Ortega is doing.
What about the other forces? I mean, the people, presumably there must be a lot of the former Sandinistas who are equally indignant as you about the betrayal of what they fought for many years ago. And you mentioned a sort of rethinking about the cause for the Contras. Is there any signs of a coalition between the sort of indigenous former Contras, the small peasants, and the Sandinistas to revolt against what he's been doing?
Let me clarify two things. I supported the Sandinista revolution. I was not a Sandinista. It's a different thing. But there are many of the Sandinistas and many of former members of the Sandinista government, such as Sergio Ramirez, who was the vice president and who is a renowned and distinguished writer and historian, who is who insisted in remaining in Nicaragua and who continuously denounce him. And I just read in a remarkable article that he wrote for El País. He writes to El País quite often, and denouncing this foreign agent as enemy of the country. And then you have Comandante Dos, you have many, Carlos Fernando Chamorro, who used to run Barricada, who very early on denounced Daniel Ortega. And I will tell you who was one of the people that I loved, that we recently lost, that was Ernesto Cardenal, the great poet and writer that denounced Daniel Ortega very early on. And one of the reasons he denounced it was because he accused Daniel Ortega of having seduced his stepdaughter, Soil America, the daughter of Rosario Murillo, to have seduced her from the age of 11 onward. And I will admit to you that at first when I heard that, I didn't believe it until I asked Ernesto, is it true that Daniel Ortega seduced his stepdaughter? And he said, yes, it is true. And that then Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo were enemies of Ernesto Cardenal and made his life absolutely impossible, like they're trying to do to any of the former Sandinistas or Sandinistas who remain, who were part of the government, who were supportive of the Sandinista revolution, because they feel that Daniel Ortega betrayed that revolution. And I accuse him of betraying that revolution. And for those who think that Daniel Ortega is a leftist leader, let me clarify for you. Daniel Ortega introduced new neoliberal policies in Nicaragua because he made deals with the most powerful families in Nicaragua, including that of the richest men in Nicaragua. And therefore, those who have this ideal or this illusion of this leftist government, they should know that Daniel Ortega is an opportunist. He will make deals with anyone. He will do anything to stay in power. and I am sad and I am concerned, and I'm here to say we need your help. We need you to focus and pay attention to what's happening in the country, because we are a small country, and I know that the world has so many crises at the moment, and that Nicaragua is lost in among all of those. I know that we don't have petrol or oil like Venezuela, but we are an important country who has stood up to dictators, who yearn to have a democracy and to attain justice and to be able to get rid of once and for all for Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo.
Well, you touched on an interesting point there, is that he still has this penumbra, you might say, of leftness. I mean, he seems to associate with other dictators and tyrants who put a veneer of leftness about them. He's very friendly with Cuba, with Venezuela, isn't he still?
Well,
they can be happy with it.
let me clarify something, because
Please.
it's really important that we understand this idea about left and right. Let's forget about left and right. We should think about which governments are brutal and murderous dictator, regardless of whether they are left or right, like Maduro and Daniel Ortega and some of the leaders in Cuba. Let's think about really which of those governments have a democracy, which of those governments respect human rights, where there is justice, where there is free elections, where people can live in peace, and where are those governments that adhere to the rule of law? Not Nicaragua, not Maduro. Let's forget about it. Me, as someone who has been a progressive voice around, I think, throughout my life, who has denounced right-wing governments around the world, I must tell you that it is important that we really come to understand that this is not about left or right. This is about right and wrong. And this is about dictators and democratic leaders. And Maduro and Daniel Ortega and Evo Morales are not, maybe not on the same level, but are not great Democrats. And we need to understand that, and we need to condemn governments that commit crimes against humanity and that use torture and that use legislation to curtail the rights of people, and who persecute the media, who persecute the free press, who persecute the church, who persecute women, students, and kill poor farmers.
Well, that's why I was extra pleased to have you along, because there are people out there who are sort of confused with this, the ghosts of leftness. There are people out there who still behave as though Putin is a revolutionary leader, as opposed to being a corrupt oligarch. We've seen with Venezuela, there are people who thought that, who insisted that Saddam Hussein was a wonderful people's democrat fighting against it. And you make a very interesting point about the left and the so-called self-styled left and right and its irrelevance and the importance of human rights, because many on the left, especially in America, tend to have a sort of ivory tower view of this. They have litmus tests for leftness, and unfortunately, human rights isn't necessarily one of them. What can we do to alter that?
Well, I think that we need to start having a more objective and a more realistic views of the left and the right, that we must not judge or have preconceived notions that we have to defend brutal and murderous dictators just because they're supposed to be from the left. We have to, we have to be honest and face up to the fact. Me, as someone who will have more sympathy towards progressive views, I feel betrayed. I feel betrayed by someone like Daniel Ortega, who represented a hope for the Sandinista revolution, represented a hope, not just for Nicaragua, but for millions of people throughout the world who thought this will be the right option for countries in the developing world. I feel betrayed, and for if at any moment I thought that what we were seeing in Venezuela was a resemblance of democracy, I felt betrayed by someone like Evo Morales. Maybe not the horrors and the persecution, not at the same level than Maduro and Daniel Ortega, but as well, I mean, here you had an indigenous leader. So I thought, great to have an indigenous leader ruling a country, but he betrayed his own people. And so let's forget about that. And let's forget about the fact that how can anyone defend Putin? By the way, this law of the foreign agent is a Putin law that has been introduced in Nicaragua. Of course, Putin is a supporter of Nicaragua, is a supporter of Venezuela, is a supporter of Cuba. And why? He's been to Nicaragua.
It's not because of his socialist principles. I'm quite sure that, you know, the kleptocrat in chief in the Kremlin has not betrayed has not shown a socialist principle for 30 years, even in word, I think.
Well, he is a murderous dictator himself.
What about in the case of Nicaragua? We mentioned about the draconian abortion laws against women. In what other ways, or one of the things that the Sandinista revolution promised and to some extent delivered was liberation for women, for Nicaraguan women? What other measures has he taken that erode that short of killing people?
Well, we have in Nicaragua one of the highest level of femicide. We have a pandemic of rape. I just read a horrific report in La Prensa about how many young girls have been assassinated and raped in Nicaragua. I mean, 2 or 3 days ago, the police was really harassing 3 of the women's organizations in Nicaragua, as well as one of the poor farmers in Nicaragua. Women have been the victims of the Ortega Murillo government. All of these promises that we thought, that we believed, when those who believed that the revolution, that it was going to be an advancement for women and for women to attain gender equality in Nicaragua. Very soon after the victory, that began to show that it was a false promise and women were not really acquiring the improvements that have been promised to them.
Is any of this based on legislation, or is it simply the practice of the police and the authorities showing chauvinism?
Both. The abortion laws, who have been draconian in Nicaragua, but legislations as well, and persecution by the police and by the death squads, because in Nicaragua we have death squads. And then let's not forget about how many people have been murdered in Nicaragua, the women. Remember that I just told you about this very important tribunal of conscience from the
from ARIA,
the Arias Foundation, that documented the case of 11 women who were put in jail and who were raped and who were victims of sexual violence by the government by the regime of Daniel Ortega. But not only women, there were 7 men.
The United, we had, for all those years, we remember the almost parodies of anti-leftism from Ronald Reagan. How is the United States doing enough about it at the moment in terms of denunciation, or are they quiescent? If you remember the famous words of Franklin Delano Roosevelt about Somoza, he's the son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. So, I mean, is this the attitude with Ortega?
I will say that the Trump administration has been very clear in condemning Daniel Ortega on pursuing sanctions. So have been the Democrats. And let's be clear about this for those who think that if there was a democratic government in the United States, that they will have a different policy towards Daniel Ortega. No, Daniel Ortega is a pariah, is a criminal, is a murderous dictator. And whether it is Donald Trump or whether it is Biden, it certainly will, I am certain that they will have a tough policy towards Daniel Ortega in condemning him and imposing sanctions on them. And there's been a lot of the Congress from a bipartisan way has been very much against Daniel Ortega. In fact, if there is anything I can say and anything I can ask is to appeal to the European Union to be more more defined, to impose sanctions on those criminal politicians that are part of the regime, to be more forthcoming, because Nicaragua needs their support, and in a more contundente, in a more radical, more clear way than they have been until today.
I think many of the Europeans still suffer from the illusions of pseudo-leftism, because they spent so many years combating Ronald Reagan and the US over Nicaragua.
I don't know if it really is that, or it is simply that that we are not in their sphere of interest at the moment, but I hope that they will be. There was recently a real condemnation from some MEP about this new legislation of the foreign agent that came out, and they were very clear in their condemnation of it, as have been many NGO and the United Nations, and in condemning this new legislation that Daniel Ortega intends to introduce in Nicaragua.
So who are these foreign funders that Ortega is so worried about? Human Rights Watch, Open Society, the usual suspects, or?
Anything, anyone. Well, you know that he has taken away the legal status of 10 NGOs and media media companies in Nicaragua. So he's probably thinking about the political candidates, if they will receive any funding from outside, any journalist who is working for foreign companies, any journalist who will write for a foreign company, anybody who will receive any funding from outside is a total control, is clamping down on the Nicaraguan citizens to have total control and to exert more and more repression in the country that will not allow us to have free elections in 2021. I mean, it is clear. And the sad thing, the sad situation of Nicaragua is that we don't have, there is not, this is a non-violent resistance. This is not a military, we will not have a military coup, and he knows that. He has all the weapons, and he's using all those weapons to dominate the people, to assassinate the people, and to control the people in Nicaragua.
No, I spent, there's an extra edge of irony here, sharp irony. I'm, as a former British leftist, I think I'm still a leftist, just former British at the time. I helped fundraise for the Sandinistas. We sent money to support the Sandinistas and to oppose the countries.
You're not unique. So many people believed that the Sandinistas were the answer, to the right wing, the answer to the Somoza, the answer to the banana republic dictator. But you see, they claim that they were defending the sovereignty of Nicaragua, that Somoza have sold out to the United States, um, to the banana companies and others, which was true. But Daniel Ortega was selling the interoceanic canal to a Chinese company, selling our most precious national treasure, which is the lake water sources. And that's why I came as well with Amnesty International to release a report that is called Rights for Sale, and went to march with the poor farmers in remote places in
Perhaps we
Nicaragua.
should explain, this is a sort of Chinese financed alternative to the Panama Canal, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. But this was a private individual, a very mysterious character. It was never clear that the Chinese government was behind. But Daniel Ortega made a deal with him and gave him extraordinary concessions of the country, betraying every promise he made about respecting the sovereignty of the territory of Nicaragua.
And the promises on the environment and other issues as well
were terrible, by the way, terrible destruction of the environment, terrible corruption of his government, on the destruction of protected areas in Nicaragua. The Indio Maíz, which is the FAR in Indio Maíz, who led to the revolt of the students at the beginning, was one of the issues, and continued to. The indigenous people in Nicaragua have been persecuted, have been murdered in the country. So this is not a environmentally loving regime.
So we take it the question was about who the foreign supporters are and what their motives and goals are. I'm presuming the Chinese government is at least benignly supportive of one of their nationals doing this. What other countries are supporting, and why? What does Putin get out of it? What does Maduro get out of it?
Well, Maduro is being it was a source, and before a source, was a very close knit between Venezuela and Nicaragua, and they provided oil to Nicaragua that allowed Daniel Ortega to become very wealthy, because there was a lot of corruption in the deals that Nicaragua had with Venezuela. Today, they continue, Maduro continues to be very close to Daniel Ortega, and except, of course, they have less power than they used to have.
There's less money from Maduro now than there used to be.
Less money than they used to have, yeah.
So there are some blessings. So, I mean, what pressure can we put on it? Because these countries support them internationally in the United Nations, don't they? They tend to be an automatic block of kleptocrats that stick together when it comes to votes on human rights issues and similar things.
Yes, and Daniel Ortega was very close to some of the most brutal dictators around the world. Saddam Hussein, I think that he visited him. I'm sure that, of course, Iran, he's very close to them. I said Russia. Many of the Latin American countries, I think, have come to understand that Daniel Ortega is a threat to the region and is a threat to Latin America, the stability of Latin America, and certainly a threat to the stability of Central America.
What would your attitude be if in Washington the traditional reflex kicks in and we hear calls for sanctions against Nicaragua?
Well, there's been quite a few sanctions imposed not on Nicaragua as we used to do, but the Magnitsky sanctions on specific individuals, and one of the last one was the head of the army.
And what do they consist of?
Well, the Magnitsky is a very sophisticated method that was developed to deal with corrupt individuals in Russia, and that will prevent them from visiting and will not allow them to do business with certain countries like the United States, or depending where it is. And Europe has these same tools that can be used against corrupt individuals in the regime of Daniel Ortega.
But you're saying that Europe is being lackadaisical about this. Is there are there any particular countries that are especially favorable or dragging their feet about action?
Well, my appeal is in particular to Spain, since Spain has a close relationship to Latin America, a historical relationship to Latin America. But I will say all of European countries, I hope, that will do. Perhaps now with these new legislations, they will be more forthcoming in imposing those sanctions.
There's one, it's coming from off base, but I am, amongst other things, the historian of rum. I've written a history of rum. And one of the issues which the rum community was, Nicaragua is famous for flor de caña.
Yes.
It's rum. And I understand a few years ago there were some serious controversies about the way they were treating their workers in terms of pay, exposure to insecticides, etc., etc. Can you fit this into this complex?
I can. In fact, the owners of Ron Flor de Caña is one of the families that he is, Carlos is probably the wealthiest person in Nicaragua. And he's been very close ally to Daniel Ortega throughout these years. His support has been instrumental in keeping Daniel Ortega in power, as well, and lobbying against sanctions against Nicaragua, from the United States and from members of Congress. So through Ron Flor de Caña may be a good rum, but I will say that we should boycott Ron Flor de Caña because of the conduct of the owner of that company.
I know some of the other distilleries in the Caribbean say it's not as good as it claims to be. They detected additives, but they're purists, and rum people tend to be fairly fanatical about these things. But that is not a surprise in a way, that the Ron Flor de Caña is a friend of Ortega's. Are there any other well-known companies or issues that we should be looking for?
Well, I think that there's been three very powerful families who have really had a close relationship with Daniel Ortega. And in reality, one of the things that has been the most surprising about the country has been the fact that the private sector has not really responded to the calls from the people to call for a general and indefinite strike, which was instrumental in helping the Nicaraguan people to overthrow the Somoza. And at moments when it would have been critical for the private sector to have called for an indefinite and general strike in Nicaragua, they refused. They have refused to do it. They did 1 or 2 days, but that is not really something that will affect Daniel Ortega.
Mm-hmm. So do you have any plans to go back in the near future? It's taking a risk, but you might want to. I know it's never worried you in the past.
I know that Daniel Ortega wants to shut up the voices of dissent in Nicaragua, that he wants to make sure that people will not have access to to speak in social media and to be able to have free press in Nicaragua. But I challenge him. I'm not scared of him. I will continue to fight him. I will continue to denounce him. I will continue to accuse him. I will continue to fight against his government and to call for his I don't know if I can say for his pacific overthrow of power, so that we can have his peaceful overthrow of power, since I'm not a violent person. But I hope, and I will continue to lend my voice to the Nicaraguans, no matter what Daniel Ortega's threats are. Unfortunately, I am Nicaragua, but I am also British.
Bianca, well, that seems to be a stirring and resounding note to finish on. I'd like to thank you very much and congratulate you again on your courage in actually going to Nicaragua and speaking up about it. This is Ian Williams, the president of the Foreign Press Association of New York in the USA, and we have been hosting Bianca Jagger from the Bianca Jagger Human Rights Foundation, talking about the Ortega regime in Nicaragua and its sins. You can get more details from us, and we'll put up a note with the Bianca Jagger Human Rights Foundation, so you can go for more details. Thank you very much, Bianca.
May I make a
please? Yes.
Very small? And
yes,
I hope that those who are listening to me, that maybe will consider supporting the work of the Bianca Jagger Human Rights Foundation, that is critical at this moment, especially during the pandemic, so that we can continue to struggle against Daniel Ortega and support the people of Nicaragua. Thank you very much for hosting me. It's been a pleasure to be with you, Ian, and to see you again, even from afar.
Thank you, Bianca.
Thank you.